Green is forward, red is back, and that's the light.
Okay. Thank you. I've become interested in how we can integrate the landscape and daylight, because we don't usually hear much talk about the fact that they are aspects of each other. And so I'm going to use the work of Alvar Aalto, just a few projects to illustrate what I've found. Some years ago, Robert Venturi, the American architect, wrote a highly admiring article about Alvar Aalto. And in it, he ended by saying what he really liked about Aalto was that Aalto didn't write. And that is not exactly true. In fact, Aalto's lectures have been transcribed, and he wrote several articles, and they're included in a book that was edited by Aalto's great friend, Joran Schilt. What is really interesting about Aalto's lectures and writing is that he never talked very much about daylight. And this is kind of astonishing because Alvar Aalto's work, for those of you who know it, was known for its great use of daylight. He is considered a master of light, and that's what he didn't say much about. So I became interested in seeing just what was going on, what might have helped Aalto generate his ideas about daylight. There are some people who have begun to talk about the integration of the landscape, which we could say is an aspect of view, and the nature of light, the sky. Louekari wrote, compared to the urban environment, the spatial structure of the forest is typified by incomplete spatial confinement, free-flowing nature of space, the layering of views in the depth of direction, clustering of views, and the nature of light. And Norberg Schultz wrote, the Nordic forest, getting closer to Aalto's home, the Nordic forest is distinguished by an interminable multitude of different phenomena. The ground is rarely continuous. The sky is hardly experienced as a total hemisphere, but is narrowed in between the contours of trees and rocks, and is continuously modified by the clouds. The sun is relatively low and creates a varied play of spots of light and shadow. So when we look at the landscape, particularly the Nordic and the Finnish landscape, what are the characteristics that we see? We typically see light that's filtered through trees, through vegetation. We see an overcast sky. We see the colors, the green of the landscape against the blue of the sky. We see light reflected from the ground plane from water, and we see it reflected from the ground plane through snow and ice. We see light filtered through the sky, an overcast sky, and coming into the landscape, especially sun. We see an irregular landscape, and we can be directed by light. We can see contrast spots of light that direct us through the landscape. So where does this place Aalto? Aalto is a really interesting character. His grandfather, his maternal grandfather, was a forester. Okay? So he knew the landscape. He grew up hunting and fishing with his family in a culture that was closely connected to the experience of landscape, right? An intuitive experience. But also, Aalto's father was a surveyor, and Aalto worked for his father. In fact, Aalto's responsible to a great degree for laying out the rail line between Jyväskylä and Pieksämäki. This means that Aalto had a handle on two essential things when it comes to the landscape. He had an intuitive, qualitative grasp of the landscape and its variations, and he knew how to quantify it. In other words, if you look at my bottom diagram, he had the ability to compensate for the variations in the landscape with a rail line, for example, being able to compensate for the need for a slow curve, the rises and falls in the landscape. This idea of regularity against regularity is a constant in Aalto's work. So what do we have when we combine the two? Aspects of light and landscape include spaces within spaces, diverse views, light from multiple sources, changing light. Daylight changes all day, and we encourage the movement of people through these spaces. So Aalto's architecture then shows a strong interest in variations within regularity and improvisations on circumstance. I'm going to show you three Aalto projects, all of them libraries. This is the Viipuri Library, his first. And this is a sketch by Aalto on the screen now. It shows his preliminary idea sketch. It's a mountainscape with plateaus that one could walk up and around, traverse through it, circled by a multitude of suns. And here's what he did with this idea. He gave us a path that takes us up, around, up again, and up into a reading and book room with a multitude of suns. Here's his sketch of his diffused sunlight diffusing sky wells. Each of those is about 6 or 7 feet deep and just about the same in diameter, such that these wells cut off 52-degree angle low sunlight at the height of summer, which means that he translates almost horizontal sunlight into vertical sunlight and diffuses it into this room so that you get a sunlighted but diffused sunlighted atmosphere. Nevertheless, I feel that this room, there's the roofscapes, you can see all the skylights and the room. Nevertheless, I feel that this is sort of a, it works beautifully, but it's a one-liner, and he was able to do more. He then incorporated more distinct ideas about the sky, the Finnish sky, broken sky, light coming through clouds, light coming through the landscape. This is his library at Seinäjoki, also in Finland. This building, the clear-story lights here are concealed on the south side by louvers so that light is bounced up into the room. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see how sunlight is bounced in a curved deflector, bounced again against the wall, and then into the reading space and into a lower space, a space within a space. You can see that from the north, there are also clear-story lights, unobstructed, so that you can receive north light, which is also then bounced, reflected, diffused by the ceiling. And you can see the section he carved to replicate this idea of a broken sky view. And this is what it looks like inside. From the south, you get sunlight reflected. You get a darker area through lower clouds, if you will, over a lower reading area, a space within a space. And here's the daylight coming in from the skylights, or the clear stories over the circulation desk. And this lower area, this area is defined by bookshelves, by stairs, by the ceiling, by light, and by columns. It's a space within a space. It's very much reminiscent of a landscape. So he's integrating his ideas about the sky and the landscape as one. This is his design for the Mount Angel Library in Oregon. And for this, he seems like he's almost took an idea of a human response to landscape, the idea of the Greek amphitheater, which you see on the left. On the right is Aalto's sketch from Sicily in 1952, in which he depicts a somewhat fanciful cascading set of steps, an amphitheater, but in an Aalto style, coming down the landscape. So here's the section through the library at Mount Angel, and you can see a little bit of sunlight being permitted in, but his main concentration here is bringing in skylight on the right through monitors and into this canyon he develops. When you enter the building, you enter low, there's a circulation desk, and then arrayed around you in the manner of a Greek theater is an array of bookshelves and small spaces, and then you can see down. So he creates a bit of a canyon. The ceiling and soffit above is a set of broken planes, curved, so that they reflects and diffuses skylight into the room, into the spaces. The different spaces have different qualities of light. They have diverse views. They have different levels of enclosure by columns, by books, by bookshelves, by counters, by stairs, and by people when they inhabit it. And there are a lot of roots through it. It is a landscape. There's another view of this canyon. So he's really come to a point here in his library. This is a classic library type where he's able to integrate the landscape and skylight. The really good news here is that for those of us who study Nordic light, an area where you really have to deal with daylight or you can't really make an effective building at all, is that these principles, altered slightly, are effective in any part of the world. Even in Italy, this is a small church in Riole, Italy by Aalto. If you know where the sun is in the sky at different times of the day, at different seasons of the year, you can generate architecture with landscape, and you can take advantage, as Aalto did, of his ideas about the landscape to make an integrated set of spaces that are for the movement of people and the movement of light. Tim Edensor is one of those few people who writes about landscape and sky, said, "Landscape is alive with energies, yet the most evident angel of vitality agent of vitality is the light that pervades the land and sky. Thank you very much.